I'm Knopf, and this is threat modeling with my wife, which is the only relationship advice I'll ever give to someone. Really bad idea. Do not recommend this at all. Come on in. So a little about me. I'm currently a Director of Application Security at Belkin and Linksys, responsible for the security of all of Belkin, Linksys, and WeMo products. We do PSIRT, SDL, pen testing, incident response, and pretty much everything else security related. So I've been doing QA development for 20 years, and I actually started programming when I was 5, and I still have the system I program on, and my kids learn on it, which is an Atari 800. So little computer history, yeah. So go a little bit through, talk about threat modeling my wife. You're probably like, what the hell? I was going to go through the action and explain why I would do a threat model on my wife and what the hell I was thinking. CRPS, you'll learn what that is really quickly. And why would I even consider this? And talk about IoT security and then get into the device and the threat model. I want to make it clear, I actually did not pen test this, and for reasons I'll explain shortly, you'll understand why. Alright, so the accident. So my wife was at a supermarket and had a lovely 2.5-pound sign fall on her foot. Not something I recommend. And it basically crushed her foot, caused nerve damage, fractured bone, tore some ligaments. Not exactly fantastic fun. And I learned about this thing called CRPS, which is basically complex regional pain syndrome, which is essentially soft tissue damage that causes almost like a stroke to the nervous system. So think of it as the body is constantly sending out signals saying, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, and your brain is like, I have no idea what to do with that. And so essentially it's changes in the muscle tone, the color of the skin changes, the actual muscles atrophy. It's usually in hand, foot, or limbs. In my wife's case, it was a foot, which means since you're walking it all the time, the range of motion goes away. So she almost walks like a peg leg because she can't bend her ankle where the damage happened, which causes even more pain up the leg. So, this is a security conference, not a medical conference, so I'll basically say it sucks, and that's all you really need to know about it. So this is what you've probably seen if you've ever been to a hospital. We call this a universal pain assessment tool. So CRPS, according to WebMD, is the most painful syndrome you can have. Fantastic. Pick the winner. Before the surgery she had, on an average day, it was somewhere between an 8 and a 10, which basically means you're non-functional. Think of, this isn't, I bruised my arm, this isn't, I've been hit with a baseball bat, this is, I can't even function because the pain is so dramatic that it literally shuts down your body. Your body reacts in a way that you sleep because of pain. What's that?
That's the hangover.
No, it's far worse. It's beyond kidney stones at that point. So after the surgery, she's somewhere like at a 7, which is an improvement. But if you think about that, that's a pretty shitty place to be as an average pain day. So why threat model my wife? Aside from the fact that I'm a glutton for punishment and just have this need to reverse engineer things. First, it's my job. I do it for a living on embedded devices. And second, there wasn't any manual alternative. Some of the medical devices that are out there, defibrillators, or insulin pumps, there are things you can do manually, check your blood sugar, and those kind of things. This is not one of those devices. I could try and hook my wife up to a car battery and get rid of the pain, but it probably wouldn't work, and I'd probably get arrested. So. Let's be honest, I'm a security person, so I'm a little paranoid about what I've seen from other researchers, what they're doing with defibrillators and other products. So the doctor came in and talked to my wife and I and said, hey, we've basically exhausted all the options. Pain injections, physical therapy, they tried psychological treatment to help her get over the stress of this, which to me is not a treatment, that's a coping mechanism. And after all the nerve blocks and everything else, they said there's really two options left. One is a pain management device, and the other is basically killing the nerves. But because it's in your foot, we can't do that. Because you could kick your foot, damage it, and you wouldn't know it, and really cause even more problems. So he says, all right, well, we're going to put this device in your wife's back, and you can charge it wirelessly, and basically, power and wireless communication. I looked at him and said, do you realize what I do for a living? So I immediately thought, all right, I need to understand what this device is. So my first thought is, if you've ever seen a Small Wonder show, I was like, all right, but wait, that's an android or a cyborg? All right. And then I thought, cool, should we build her, stronger, faster, better? And then reality kind of kicked in and I went, huh, an embedded medical device in my wife's back. Yeah, probably a bad idea to pen test it, so I stuck with the threat model. And, we'll just keep it there. So I focus a lot in my work on Internet of Things technology. And I know it's the buzzword of the day, but how that related to what I was seeing in the device they were looking at, to me was, it's not a camera, it's not a thing you're turning on or off anymore. This is a device that's giving quality of life improvements to someone. There's no manual alternative at this point, so I need to understand and cope with what this is going to look like and potentially what the impact could be. So with IoT, you're seeing it pop up in almost every vertical now. Every one of these devices are IoT devices that people use and don't necessarily even realize. The eSIRT plugin that you plug into your car that sends how you speed and how you drive and how far you go. Things like Coin over here, where you can do payment systems. If you've never played around with these, if you don't have kids, these are Skylanders. They're NFC tags, which are really fun to hack around with. And you put them on a portal and they activate. So things that are potentially less risky, like toys, versus things that control pain or things that track your health or your life or where you are. So from an IoT perspective, there's three components of this that really make it up. There's the sensors, right? Whether they're heat, temperature, cameras, and there's all kinds of sensors, that can be used in any IoT device. Then you've got the protocol communication soup. Everyone trying to do a new protocol, and I even added a thread to this because I've showed this slide before. Competing protocols that aren't necessarily well supported and aren't necessarily well secured, and no one's necessarily using the same thing. And lastly, you have the people in the process, right? Because without those, it doesn't put it all together. So you have all these data sets, all these sensors being connected through wireless, through Ethernet, through any type of interface, and it's connecting data that was never connected before. So let's talk about pain management for a minute to just give some perspective. The item on the left is what a pain management device looked like in the 70s. It was a large device that had leads that went into your back. You actually had to keep it outside your body, which means you were constantly changing the device, the pad on your back, where it went into your body to make sure it didn't get infected. Very heavy to carry around, had to be recharged, not really something that was easy to use. The device on the right is 2.1 inches by 2.1 inches by 0.4 inches. It is pretty damn small for what it does, seeing as that it generates electricity in the body to block pain. The remote is about the size of a pager, so that's pretty small as well. And as this nice model has, it gets implanted somewhere in your back or butt. Excuse me. The extension goes into your spine and is cut into your spinal column. And then the leads basically run between the two. And so it's one thing to look at it on a cartoon. So why is this important? Right? Well, we're talking about any manufacturer who at this point can now start sticking wireless technology in. And why not? I want to be able to sit on the golf course and treat my patient without having to go back in the office. Sounds like a fantastic idea, right? But the problem is that they're focusing on features. They're not focusing on security. They want usability, but developers don't really care about security for the most part. And even if they do, they don't always know how to implement it. Or they don't even have the teams. And lastly, the hardware is so easy to buy now and so cheap that it means all your favorite script kiddies can now do things that it used to take security researchers to do a long time ago. So why is it different? Well, the paradigm for me isn't much different than the operating system challenges that we had 10 years ago. Except for one thing, which is that no one owns the stack. In the old OS days, you had the OS manufacturer and you had the application. The application vendor took care of everything that was in theirs. The OS vendor took care of everything that was in their part. Now you've got a original development manufacturer who has their SDK, the chip manufacturer who has their SDK, the library developer who is controlling that and may only be working part-time on it, and the manufacturer who puts that all together and is somehow responsible for that entire package. So instead of being able to update one at a time, you have to update the whole thing. And if you're, any of you coming from a Linux administration background, if something was no longer supported, what'd you do? You backported the fix. Well, can you imagine an average consumer trying to backport a vulnerability fix in their embedded device in their house? It's not going to happen. So, and really, third-party libraries use these black boxes. Developers don't want to know how to do particular protocols. They just stick it in, don't think twice, and figure it's someone else's responsibility, and they'll look at it. So, I showed you a cartoon a minute ago. This is the real thing. That is my wife, and she did approve this picture. So, there's a lot of parts here, and I'm going to explain it because this is the entire thing that she has to deal with on a daily basis. So, these are the leads. They basically, as I said, they run from these pain management devices here into her spine. And so you'll see two incisions. Contrast is a little weird. There's a 3-inch incision here, right below her waistline. That's where this pain management device is installed. And there's an 1.5-inch cut here into her spine, and that's where the leads actually go in. So unlike some of the other medical devices where researchers say, you know what, if it's vulnerable, take it out. We're talking about an operation at this point. It's tied into her spine, there's anchors, and the initial operation costs $30,000. So that's not something that we're going to just go, hey, why not? Let's just update it. The remote shows status. It's pretty small. Again, it's about the size of a pager. You just carry it in your hand. And then this is the charging unit, and I'll show you guys later. I actually have it here if you want to look at it. The charge is magnetic charge. This is a battery pack that you can use with it, and you actually plug it into the wall. So when I found a small wonder, it wasn't a joke. It was, she literally has to charge herself every week, or else the battery in this device will die. So depending on how much she's using the stimulation, it's either a week or 2 weeks, but she has to lay there and actually charge for multiple hours at a time. Depending on the signal strength of this unit here, which will show bars, if she gets 2 bars out of the 8, it takes 12 hours to charge. And just imagine sitting there, you can't fall asleep because it's dangerous. You actually have to sit there while you're charging. If I get full bars on it for her, it only takes 2 hours to charge. But you're literally heating your back at that point as you're doing magnetic charge to the skin.
What's the expected lifespan of that device?
This particular device is up to 9 years. And that was one of the considerations when I did the threat model, was there's 3 major manufacturers. Some of them only have a 1-year or 2-year lifespan. And I wasn't willing to have that kind of surgery on, if you think of the scar tissue that forms, on that regular basis. So prognosis-wise, CRPS, they hope burns itself out by the electricity essentially tricking the nervous system into resetting eventually. So with a 9-year span, we're hoping eventually it'll reset itself.
Does the entire device have to be replaced, or just the
just this portion here?
Okay, the probes can be lifted.
I don't know the lifespan on how many connections, reconnections the leads have, but the leads are used with a torque wrench to connect them. And so they do have some lifespan, but I don't know if that's longer than, it's not shorter than 9 years, I don't know if it's longer than 9 years.
9 years is a long time in technology. They'll have some other solution, but
I'm sure they will, yeah. So that's the device itself, and so again, we're not talking about, your IoT toy. We're talking about a person who needed something for, quality of life. So I'm going to throw these specs up here, and I'll post this online later. Most of this is TLDR. But basically, the things I've highlighted in red, let's talk about power for a minute. So if you need a defibrillator and someone's shocking you in the chest, you're talking about hundreds of volts of electricity, right? This is internal, so a little goes a long way here. So this has a range of 0 volts to 10.5 volts. If you think about that in the human body, 10.5 volts is a lot of electricity. My wife, at this point, can take no more than 3.4 volts in her body before it starts to be painful, which defeats the purpose of the device because it's supposed to stop the pain. So it's got a pretty large range of electricity, which is, for me, another factor.
So I'm sorry, what's the purpose of the device? Does it send signals to block?
Sure. So the whole idea is CRPS is where the body is sending pulses out, basically saying, I'm in pain. And so the pain management device, and I'll get into the next slide, but it essentially is trying to block that signal from reaching the brain by sending out pulses on the same kind of wave pattern to interrupt it. With the eventual goal of the brain resetting or the nervous system resetting and not feeling those pain signals. And unfortunately, doctors don't understand why it happens. They just know that it happens with soft tissue damage. But it is essentially almost like a stroke where it doesn't communicate properly. So it's, the remote's communicating in the 400 megahertz range. I'm not being very specific about that for security reasons. But there are documents online. You can take 15 minutes and find it. So these are some other devices from other manufacturers. Like I said, there's 3 major manufacturers. I will point out that this one here is made by a company called, well, it doesn't really matter. There's Boston Scientific and this is St. Jude, the one at the bottom. The one at the bottom was recalled. Just think about that for a minute. This is a surgery to install and uninstall these devices. They recalled the battery because the battery would leak into the body. So when you have to send out 10,000 notices of a recall to people who now are just being found out that they are having surgery to pull that out, and unfortunately they send out messages like any recall for your car. And you get a letter in the mail and go, by the way, you need major surgery again because we screwed up on this product.
Did they pay for that surgery?
And if you look online, you'll see lawsuits and that kind of stuff on that. But it just, from a, if you think about it from this point, this is no longer just updating firmware. So let's talk about the threat model. And it looks like it's slightly cut off, but this is the threat model that I built. When I originally did it, I did it on a piece of notebook paper, and I actually threat modeled 2 or 3 different models from different companies. The company that she has a model for is called Medtronic. They make 20 different models alone. So between the 3 manufacturers, I think there's 40 or 50 different models of these stimulators, which have different features. So going through those and trying to figure out which one is the right one and which one is the most secure for the situation, quite an interesting task. So a couple of the components here that are kind of critical. So the neurostimulator itself, that was the small device that was implanted in the back. You have a remote control, which is a wireless communication on the 400 megahertz bandwidth. Interesting enough, that remote has a range of less than ½ inch. So in the cases where my wife's wearing a pair of jeans and a thin t-shirt, it will not work to turn it on or off. She has to get under that to do it. So that was built as a security feature to basically kill part of the threat. So it's not like someone sitting there with an antenna from across the room trying to enable or disable this device. Magnetic battery charging, which is lovely because you're heating up the skin with a magnet. So as some of the other devices had recalls on, they would overheat or burn or scar the skin. The leads themselves, these are cords and cables in the body that are basically sending electricity from the unit all the way through to the spine, right? If you worked in wireless, we're talking about RF and EMI, right? So how do you damage that kind of equipment, right? There's RF interference that can cause damage to it. There's EMI interference. So there's a potential there when we do the threat model. That's an area that can be talked about. So I showed the remote. There's also the patient programmer, the clinician programmer, which is a giant device that the hospital uses to program it. So she goes into her doctor's office and they send programs to this device that talk about which leads send the electricity, how many volts, what's the wave pattern, what's the delay. So that could change the wave of electricity. This is not something that the patient can do themselves. They do have to go to the doctor's office for that. Unlike some of the models you've seen with defibrillators, the doctor cannot do this from remote. So there's a benefit there in that you probably don't need to change pain management programs very often, but it can't be done wirelessly. So, well, it's done wirelessly, but it's done from a half-inch away using a device that is very expensive. And yes, you potentially could do it as a researcher, but you still have a very limited range.
And is the software itself secure? Like, is that device where the software is recalibrated or calculated?
No, not at all. So, and so that's where you have to balance the insecurity versus the likelihood of that attack, even if they did crack that. So you've got the programmer, and then there's this lovely little feature here that actually checks because of some of the other devices that have problems, that actually looks for the device overheating. So it actually constantly checks the temperature of the device, and it will shut it down immediately if it overheats. So if for some reason the battery charging gets to a point where the skin heats up, and that has happened, if she lays on the device too much, it stops charging, and then she has to wait and charge later when the skin cools down. And when I say hot, I mean hot to the touch, where you can literally burn your hand on her back. So then we've got the file system where the device is where the information is being written to, and this is just the pain management profile itself. The leads that are used, they kind of look like something out of Aliens. It's a long stem with leads on it that connects to different parts of her spine. That gets adhered to the spine in different areas, and depending on where the pain program is turned on, it hits different areas of the branch of nerves. So if it's programmed wrong and the damage for my wife is in the left foot, she felt it in her right foot, or she felt it in her right hip, or in her knee and her left leg. So it can control stimulation basically from the waist down to get to the right level so that it's trying to hit the place where CRPS is. And so, again, we've got these what are called stimulation profiles, of which you can have multiple that are stored in the device itself. And the human interaction, because of the range or the lack of range on these devices, whether it's the programmer, the charging unit, or the remote, it's less than ½ inch. And so let me just show that for a minute. This is the charging unit itself. You do plug this into the wall. This is the battery product that tells you what the signal strength is, so when you're charging. And there are two options for the remote. One of them is this remote here, and it's got a lovely little antenna on it. And because the range off that device is so small, you actually have to put it on and tune it to make sure you get the right signal strength. So they really did kill the signal on this to make sure that you can't do this from far away. Because the antenna is not in the implanted device. The antenna is in the remote itself. There's another option, which is this one that clips to your shirt, which is very fashionable, so that you can plug it into your remote and then clip it on your clothes and sort of pull your shirt through so that you can charge or change the signal without having to hold your hand behind your back. So, and so from this perspective here, this device shows battery strength. It shows whether it's on or off, how many volts, what program you're running, A, B, or C, and other information. So let's get a little deeper into the threat model. So this is something I drew out. I did it for a couple different products that they had. I kind of looked at recalls on devices, issues that die even when, as far as I was looking at what doctors were complaining about or what patients were complaining about as far as damage to the skin that wasn't necessarily security related, but could have been taken advantage of from a security standpoint. So potential risks. Damage to neurostimulator caused by EMI interference. So there are multiple classes of these devices, and with people who have back problems, one of the things that you have to realize is sometimes they need MRIs. Well, if you have a metal device in your back, you can't go get an MRI. So they had to come up with versions of this that had little ferrous material so they could actually put it in a state where you could go get an MRI. And so when looking at devices, I said, all right, well, it's shielded. That means potentially someone who could be trying to cause damage with EMI interference would have a harder time doing that. Now, if someone's walking around pointing at people with a giant EMI gun, probably going to notice them, I would think. So from a, how exploitable is this? The mitigation really is there's EMI shielding on the device. Likelihood of attack is highly unlikely. I think it would be pretty obvious if someone was running around trying to put this device to your back and trigger it. If you see someone with a giant antenna pointing at you, you may want to walk away. Yeah.
Is there any effect, like microwaves with the magnetron inside, that can actually send out concentrated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you, when it's put in MRI mode, it actually shuts the device down, so it can't be sending the waves through. Yeah, from a actual wave standpoint, it would change the waves of the pain management pulse.
What about even dead circuits can actually still conduct electricity?
Yeah, so in MRI mode, it actually requires the clinician programmer to put it in MRI mode. The ones that are MRI safe have very little ferrous material. They're all titanium and aluminum. And there's enough of a gap to prevent what they call unintentional charging or unintentional stimulation. But yeah, it was one of the considerations. So Dell had this interesting threat model on medical devices. And their only comment on these kind of devices was that someone could change the stimulation profile, causing a user to be in more pain and thereby using more medication, which could potentially get them to overdose. It was the dumbest threat model I'd ever seen in my entire life. So they were saying basically you could try and walk up to someone, reprogram them, and over time they would use more medication and potentially overdose. And that was their threat. Sure, that seems like a very reasonable threat. So whether it's through the patient programmer, which is the only one that can program it, the remote can't. The remote literally just switches programs. So the mitigation, the remote only works when directly against the skin. I mean, we've been at places where my wife tries to put it over a coat or a sweater and has to move multiple layers around to get it to work. So it literally has no range. And external antennas do not changes. Both the clinician programmer, they use the same antennas for it. It has to be close to the device to even allow it to receive signal. There's a magnetic charge, there's a magnetic activation. Likelihood of attack, highly unlikely.
Is that something that might be more of an insider threat? Like a spouse wants an insurance?
I will tell you right now, I have 3 kids. I do not want to raise them on my own. My wife is highly protected. And actually, when I did this threat model, the funny thing is, I was actually looking at having her put EMI protected tape over this device, which she just looked at me and rolled her eyes. But I mean, just like the RFID blocking wallets, I thought, well, worst case scenario, you can just put this tape over the device, and then every time you want to program it or turn it on, you can peel it off. Didn't go over very well. So yeah, I
did not mean you.
No. And it's a funny question because I thought of it, and it was like, yes, but it has logs, and because the range is minimal, basically nil, you'd have to hold something against it. It's not like you're going to bump into someone in a subway and accidentally and do this without them noticing, right? And even if you did turn it, you grab your remote and you turn it right back off. But it's essentially, if someone was really dumb enough to try and do that, essentially the smoking gun would be right there. So the remote only works when directly against the skin. Same idea as a clinician programmer. Very unlikely that there would be an attack. Overheating of the skin during charging and causing burns. So this was a very big problem with these kind of devices before. The battery that leaks, other devices. There were many lawsuits about people who had burns, scarring, and even the inside of the skin receiving a lot of damage because of the heat. This particular model that we found actually had a lot of protection for that, and that was one of the critical factors in deciding with the doctor which one we wanted, which he had never had that conversation before with a patient. But in this particular case, it constantly monitors the temperature and will shut it off, and that monitoring comes from the device itself, not from the charging unit. So at any point, it stops listening, basically, if it is overheated. Likelihood of attack, you'd have to find a way around that protection in the device, and I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would require some reverse engineering. Yeah.
Even if it cuts off the wire, I'm assuming it's an induction coil inside that's receiving the signal and charging the battery. Even if they cut that off, the antenna would do that.
I'm sorry, what would you have?
The antenna could still do that. The receiving antenna.
Well, yeah, but that antenna is minimal to, it has no range.
Okay.
So it's, as I understand it from the documentation, as I said, I haven't reverse engineered this because it's in her back. From the documentation that's available, that magnetic connection is what allows that to be turned on. So if when that kills, it disables it. Whether there's an actual physical mechanism that gets in the way, I'm not sure. Theoretically, yes, you're right. So it's probably highly unlikely that this would happen. And so this is the one that I was actually most concerned with, because there was a problem with some of these, as I said, that were scarring the back because of RF interference. Well, I work for a company, there's tons of RF in the house. I was actually more worried about the stacks of routers that I have that I do testing for, and the devices I use for sniffing wireless traffic, causing damage where it would send signals out and may interfere with overcame management profiles. So the latest version of this had RF shielding across the entire cable. It was done actually for a different reason, not for security, but because the scarring of the skin itself. So instead of it leaking at one point, it distributed the heat across the entire width or length of the cable, thereby making the load and the heat to the body minimal. So it also means if someone used a blast of RF, it would not damage the cable. Now, if this cable was damaged, this would leak electricity in the body, cause shock, death, it could cause massive damage. This is the riskiest of any of the things. And not necessarily by malicious tampering, but if the leads break, if there's a car accident, if there's something that causes damage to the leads. So having a much thicker lead with lots of RF protection was something that was important.
What's the material of the lead?
Forgetting off the top of my head, I think there's titanium and it's a pretty flexible.
So it's relatively inert.
Yes.
It has to, because your body has to be able
It's actually thicker than the previous ones, but more flexible. So.
conducted testing on just permeated all of those.
Yeah, it's. I mean, as you see, there's basically a mesh of wires. So new leads disperse RF across the entire lead. There was a lot of extensive testing of this because of the damage that had been caused, not by malicious things, but interference, and other devices around those affected devices.
How does this whole thing get grounded? Is it just purely from the battery?
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing it's tied into is directly into the spine. So why did I stop at just a threat model? Well, as I said before, this was $30,000. I don't know about you, but I didn't have that kind of money sitting around to go buy another one. And I was telling this to someone before, I don't know that they would sell me one without me trying to implant it in my back or someone's back to just go around and play with. Potentially. But if I call them and say, hey, I really want to hack this device, you want to send me one? Probably not something they're going to sell to me, and it's not like I could just ask my wife if I can cut it out and play with it for a while. So, not to mention the fact that threat model wasn't exactly a great idea for a relationship building standpoint. The idea of hacking it or doing pen testing on it, wasn't even willing to go there. And like I said, I don't want to raise my kids alone, so I'd like to keep her protected. Willing to do the research if someone wants to get a Kickstarter fund together to buy one of those devices. So how would I test it? Well, here's the problem I have, is that the devices are devices to use to sniff and attack these kind of wireless protocols. They're easy to get. This is the Hack RF. I just got 2 of them. We use it at work, and it was a great thing for us because we're constantly buying different devices to be able to test different frequency ranges for Internet of Things. Well, it has a 10 megahertz to 6 gigahertz range. So literally any wireless thing that we want to test with software-defined radio, we can test. This is $330. We're not talking expensive, right? So now all of a sudden we're putting devices into hands of script kiddies and people who don't necessarily even need that technical experience to be able to do this kind of stuff. This isn't long-term security research anymore. This is, you know, commoditized hardware and, you know, idiot's guide to hacking. So this is the device. You know, again, there's many like it for doing these kind of hacking, and they're getting cheaper and easier to find. So here's my conclusion. The problem I have, and if you're a security researcher, I'm going to apologize to you now because I'm going to take it to you guys a little bit, or ladies. A lot of times you see security researchers scare people, and they do it with the intention of promoting their career. But I think we have an obligation to consumers and to people to really understand what we're talking about. And in the case of something like an insulin pump, if you have a 6-year-old child who, you know, has an insulin pump, and are you really asking them as a researcher, if you find a vulnerability, to start doing their testing and injections at school by themselves? As a parent, that's not something that you want to think about. And if some of those researchers got a lot of heat from, you know, parents who said, all right, you've scared me, I'm taking this device out of my child, but I don't really have a good way to do this. The problem is, it's a vulnerability, and we all agree, but the likelihood that someone's going around trying to, you know, pick off kids with these kind of devices is highly unlikely. Now, when Cheney in 2007 had his defibrillator, they disabled the wireless because he's the vice president of the United States at the time. And there was a high probability that someone would have tried to attack it. But it's a very different scenario. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that people understand what the real risk is and the likelihood. And I think part of what we really need to do is give consumers a way to understand who don't necessarily know about security, who aren't me or another security researcher who's going to do a threat model on a device, to understand for their family members what that impact looks like and the likelihood of it and how difficult it would be to do. You know, risk and probability, right? There's a lot of groups that are working on trying to bridge this gap between researchers and manufacturers. I am the Cavalry, Build It Securely, and the idea is getting researchers and manufacturers together to help out to really talk about these ideas, how to secure it when there isn't necessarily the budget and ability to do it. I very strongly believe that every device should have certain security testing done on it and be published publicly, so that any consumer can look at it and say, here's what the rating is, just like a 5-star crash rating. Here's what the security rating of this device is, so that I feel comfortable as a consumer putting this device in my body. And as I said, some of these devices, it's not an option to do manual. There is no manual option in my wife's case. Right? She can't do some sort of injection to do it. Right? It's internal, it's hardwired, there isn't anything else to do. And in this particular case for this device, all the vulns that came out, potential vulns, were mitigated by one of two things. The lack of antenna makes it highly unlikely that any of these attacks would actually be executed unless it was, as you said before, an insider threat. Someone who was, you know, if they were sleeping did this, right? But then there's a log, and that's the great thing about this device, is for the intended case, they had to be very careful about it. Does that mean there's no vulnerabilities in this device? Absolutely not, and I would guarantee there are vulnerabilities. I wish I could have taken farther, but from a safety standpoint, I wasn't willing to do anything that could risk the health or safety of my family. Huge thanks to my wife for putting up with this ridiculousness of me doing threat models on her, and the doctor who kind of shook his head and thought it was crazy, but thank you for attending. She actually has a card that says that she has this in her body and can't go through. Where the MRI, they have to turn it off and do special settings. She has to do a pat down because you can't go through the overload of X-ray. So, yeah.
Most of the boundaries get tested by the compliance aspects, because if you're dealing with electricity, you'll have UL. if you're dealing with a medical device, you'll have C and FDA get involved in that. I mean, if she's tased, for example, or if anyone with a medical device gets tased, the jolts, because even though it's the metal is not a conductor metal outside of the forms it's supposed to be, I mean, unless on those extreme cases, technically they should be testing for all this.
Yeah, it would be, I mean, that kind of electricity in that case would damage it. We were in a car accident, a very minor car accident after that, and no one was injured, you know, my back was sore. But my first thought was actually, oh, did this device get damaged? Because, you know, it was 8 months away from the surgery, but there was a potential that what's a small bump to me could be much more damaging to that.
Right, because if it's shifted by a micromillimeter, it's still.
There's leads, they're torque wrenched in, the anchors are tied into her spine. Yeah, so those kind of things could potentially damage them and be much more severe.
But supposedly it is tested, and a lot of that mitigation is really to, even though you would look at the shorter antenna to avoid a hack, but I think for the most part, from what they're looking for in terms of compliance standards, is not really from the hacking aspect of it, it's just from any accidental interference.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So I'm not a medical expert by any means. I've test embedded networking devices, but the people that I've talked to who do medical devices and they specialize in it, what they'll tell you is that the FDA is a little tricky in this. If it is an unintended consequence of an intended feature, and I know it's really weird, but for this particular device, think of it as the intended feature here is electrical stimulation of the nervous system to block pain. So the unintended consequence would be someone jacking up that pain stimulation very high. And because that's the unintended consequence, they protect this device against that. When you have a defibrillator whose intended consequence is not to defibrillate them through the wireless signal like it was done by Barnaby Jack and those people, so the FDA doesn't consider that in approving those devices because it was never in the consideration of what it was supposed to do. The wireless was for programming, not for actually executing that that shock. And so they won't even consider those consequences that aren't in the what they call the unintentional intended path. It gets kind of ugly. From my perspective, if there's vulnerabilities that are out there that are shown, there needs to be a way to resolve them. The interesting thing, as a final note, there is another device that came out since my wife had her surgery, which scared me even more, which was to address some of these concerns. It has firmware update capabilities from external, which I just shook my head and went, okay, so you just opened the threat model even more. So you can send firmware to the device without having to uninstall it or operate. I could bet a lot of money that that's not signed or encrypted or protected in the way that embedded device firmware should be.
Only if it's in the compliance standards itself, yeah.
Which FDA doesn't look at.
No.
You know, in a way, there's a precedent here because going forward, it's a
Yeah.
well, I'm just saying there needs to be.
I think we're going to get to a point, and this is not just for devices like this, but this shows the seriousness of it. But with any IoT device that has the capability, like your fridge, right? If you buy a device and you have it for 20 years in a fridge, and it's supported for 2, at some point, if it gets compromised, that's where you're going to start to see stuff in the FTC and government regulations around how long it has to be supported, what the support needs to look like, and where there's no regulation now, there are things that are going to change in what the FTC is doing to make this a much more significant impact. So, I know that the FDA has asked security researchers to reach out to them. In this particular case, since I only did a threat model, I haven't contacted the manufacturer to warn them of any vulnerabilities because I haven't, and I also don't want them to come after me from the CFAA because I never actually sent signals to this device or tried to intercept them. But I was very clear about that because I didn't want to cause any damage. So, yeah.
I am the company released the 5-star automated safety program. Do you see something in that same spirit?
Yeah, so Josh and I had a conversation about this at DEF CON, and I work very closely with the Belkin Security Group. It's not their current intention, but it is something they definitely see as they'd like to get to. And I think with any of these kind of devices, consumers are never going to be security conscious. I think it's a delusional goal to have them understand that and start asking security questions. I think it's our job as security researchers and security professionals to make sure they have the information they need so they don't have to think about it. So if there's a 5-star rating on devices that affect health, that affect safety, I think it's something that's we're going to find that'll be necessary. Unfortunately, the way we get there is probably going to be something catastrophic. Yeah.
Perhaps I missed it, and I apologize if I did, but I'm curious why you didn't include the clinician as part of your threat model.
It actually was in there. The clinician one was the giant one.
Well, sorry, I saw it. I mean, yes, it was up in the top right corner, but like when you had the slides where you're talking about the potential risks, I'm curious why you didn't consider that.
Oh, it actually is in there. Go back for a second. The clinician programmer is in the top right. So as far as the clinician themselves, go to the programmer, when you program it, it turns it on and tests it, so you would know, because on the remote, it shows you what the modes are and the strength. So they don't just program it. I mean, I suppose they could, but that breaks the protocol. They're doing it with you and saying, all right, is it hitting the right muscles or the right nerves in your leg? You know, it wasn't, my wife would say, all right, I'm feeling it in my right foot instead of my left foot. So once it's applied, then you can change from the remote what the profiles are. But yeah, to me, it's very much the same as far as what you can send when programming it. The likelihood that you would be able to program it running after someone trying to do that, that's much harder because there's a much longer sequence than the remote, where the remote takes a second or two to send the program through.
How's the device to program the clinician's device protected in the office?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Is that connected?
Well, actually, I do know part. The doctor's office that we went to, they don't have the programmer. So in this case, Medtronic's rep would fly out to come program it. And she lived somewhere in, I think she covered a couple states. So she would come out and program it and then fly back to wherever she lived. And if we had an issue, we would call her. The interesting thing is we actually lost the remote because my son loves to play with gadgets. And this is where we got into the interesting pen testing, because I looked at my wife and I said, I could turn this on if you wanted me to. I could help you figure this out. So when she said no. But luckily, and this is where we get to usability versus security, they were able to send us a remote, which is normally $150. It took a week and a half to get the remote. So for that time, luckily we had gone swimming and she didn't have the stimulation device on, so she wasn't able to use it. But at that point, all she had to do was touch that remote to her body and it immediately worked. So there's a security risk in there as part of that, but there's also a usability, because had she had gone to have it reprogrammed, and that means that's a lot more time that she doesn't have that kind of pain relief. So. For me, because of the trade-off, I'd rather have that as, hey, I'm on vacation and I lost it and I need a remote shipped to me ASAP, rather than someone say, oh no, you got to come home for vacation and go to the doctor's office and make an appointment. Yeah. There's a balance there, and I think there are definitely vulnerabilities, but I think that's a nice balance for us.
And they download the logs, right, when they do the programming?
The device does store logs of what pain profiles have been programmed, and as far as what the format and how secure it is, I can't speak to that, and I would think it's probably not. But again, I didn't want to mess with that.
Your next presentation, you have to add your son as a.
Is it their mom? Yeah. My 2-year-old son. So if by chance she gets electrocuted, it wasn't me.
We didn't record that part.
You have to have the remote to adjust it, or you said.
No, the remote. The remote. This is the charging remote, so it's much smaller than this one. It looks kind of like it. I showed in the pictures. It's the only thing that she uses aside from charging.
Is that a spare?
No, this is the only charging unit. So if I lose it, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
But yeah, this device is what she carries with her. When she drives, she has to turn it to a different program. So if you've ever gone to a chiropractor and had the electrical stimulation on your back, it's the exact same thing, just internal. So if you move a little bit to the wrong way and you get a big shock, it's exactly what she gets. It's just a lot stronger of a shock. So if she's picking up the kids or if she's picking up groceries, she has to adjust that. So I would say 15 to 20 times a day she's doing some sort of adjustment with that remote. So it's always around.
So basically, we're looking at a denial of service attack by your child.
That would be one way to consider it, yes.
The remote looks very similar to, I'm guessing, next year's DEFCON badge.
Let's have a hackathon.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, I offered my services to help turn it back on.
She was a little
She wise.
Yes, exactly.
Did you get your son to sign the acceptable use agreement?
I did have my 8-year-old explain to his teacher what a threat model was in class, which I was very proud of, and my wife was like, I didn't really understand what that was. So, yeah. Cool, anything else? Thank you very much.